Our next speaker is going to look, I think, at this Faustian bargain from a slightly different perspective, and that is in a way that emphasizes, I think, a bit more of the normalcy of it. His name is Ted Striphas. He's the director of Film and Media Studies program at Indiana University and is recently the author of The Late Age of Print, which came out, I believe, on Columbia, right? Columbia University Press, a book that very much emphasizes the continuities rather than the discontinuities that are so typically attendant to the sort of portentous technological shifts. So, welcome, Ted.
Good. Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to thank Laura and Jack Balkin for inviting me to be here today, and also to Perry for all of his coordination and tech support and all of those wonderful things you do. I'd like to thank Jonathan in advance for responding not only to the panel, but of course to the symposium thus far, and Ted for his military precision in terms of keeping us on track and making sure we run a tight ship here. And thanks to all of you for getting up today and for being here. My talk today is, in many respects, a kind of outgrowth of the book that Ted had mentioned earlier, The Late Age of Print, Everyday Book Culture from Consumerism to Control, which is a history of at least some of the ways in which books became the kind of prevalent and pedestrian artifacts that we recognize them to be today. It wasn't always the case that books were a medium that was prevalent in everyday life. And so the question that I ask in The Late Age of Print is, how do we get from point A to point B? But what the other sort of aspect of The Late Age of Print is a concern for some of the ways in which, with the growth of the ubiquity of books in society, there arise these incredible anxieties about their circulation. And in response, then, many attempts to control some of the ways in which books can circulate in society. So the work that I'll be presenting here today is not from the late age of print per se, but it is an outgrowth of some of the themes that I introduced there, particularly in the chapter on electronic books, where I look at electronic books as a kind of response to some of those concerns about book circulation. So, excuse me. Today I'll be talking about Amazon's portable electronic e-reading device, Kindle, which went on sale beginning November 19th, 2007, and immediately caused a stir. Kindle's purpose, explained Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos in a Newsweek cover story, would be to bring books, what he called, and I love this phrase, the last bastion of analog, into the digital realm. Later that week on the Charlie Rose Show, after having said that, he decided to retrench somewhat. There he indicated that the company's new e-reader wasn't intended to outbook the book, by which, of course, he meant to outbook the printed book. Quote, instead of trying to duplicate every last feature, Bezos clarified, we have to look for things that we can do with this technology that we would never do with a paper book, end quote. So here, Bezos put his finger on what you might call the paradox of the e-book. By this I mean that Kindle and other e-reading devices are at once less and more capable of reproducing the form and function. You might call it the experience of printed books. Now, I'll demonstrate more in a moment how a great deal of public conversation about Kindle and about the moral and intellectual worth of e-books in general operates within the narrow confines of this paradox. But for now, what I want to do is to argue that a fixation on Kindle's paradoxically imitative qualities, the degree to which it does or doesn't resemble the printed book, deflects attention from the ways in which Amazon aspires to transform digital text into an economically lucrative, the reading of digital texts into an economically lucrative value-generating activity. So this first section is called, of course, the paradox of the e-book. Now, Kindle presents itself as clearly and undeniably book-like, by which I mean printed book-like. The box containing the first generation Kindle resembles a dictionary, encyclopedia, or other substantial reference matter. Its carrying case could easily pass for a fine leather-bound journal, perhaps a daybook. These are what the literary theorist Gerard Genette would call the paratextual, or perhaps it would be more accurate in this case to say the paratechnological. Elements whose purpose is to frame the perception and use of a given text, or in the case of Kindle, a given textual platform. They are, in Genette's words, the thresholds of interpretation through which one must pass en route to using Kindle. Now, this has been ameliorated somewhat with the introduction of the second generation Kindle. It's that sort of thin thing you can see off to the side. It's actually behind the word papercentrism, but it's lying on top of the New York Times. One of the sort of elements of Kindle 2.0 has been to shrink it down so that it's much thinner than a traditional paper book. But what's also interesting to me in the imagery that's accompanied the rollout, of Kindle 2 is the way in which it is still nevertheless put alongside consistently paper objects. This is what the literary theorist and technology scholar has called, Gary Hall has called paper-centrism in his wonderful book, Digitize This Book. If you have not read this book, I cannot recommend it highly enough. And what's interesting about the idea of paper-centrism is the profound gravitational pull that paper objects seem to exude on digital objects, and how, even when they are trying to supplant, these digital objects are trying to supplant their printed counterparts, they are nonetheless constantly likened to some kind of paper original. It is as though paper is the thing. So, with that then, Kindle has also been praised for, oh, excuse me, let me go back here. There we go, paper-centrism. Okay, Kindle has also been praised for mimicking the immersive experience said to characterize printed book reading, thanks to its use of high-tech electronic ink. Quote, the key figure of a printed book is that it disappears, end quote, Bezos has claimed. And it is precisely this level of transparency that Kindle is supposed to achieve. Now, you can probably see where this is headed, more or less, straight into the paradox of the ebook. Now, this is especially so when you factor in all of Kindle's ostensible improvements over printed books, which are often and widely touted. These include things like the dictionary, the ability to change font sizes at the push of a button, the wireless connectivity, and, of course, the controversial text-to-speech feature, which has raised the ire of the Authors Guild in the latest iteration of the Kindle. I sort through this paradox of the book at length in the late age of print, so I won't try to adjudicate it or even try to reconcile it here. But I will note, however, that at least since the time of Plato, virtually every communication technology has been accused of diminishing the presence or the authority of the word, from the human voice to the human hand, on down to the typewriter, the word processor, and beyond. So it seems like we can never win. Either we resign ourselves then to living in a world in which technology leads in this Faustian bargain to incrementally diminished capacities and to a spiraling loss of authenticity, or else we try to reframe the problem so that we might ask questions about Kindle beyond its ability or not to outbook the book. And so to do that then, I want to shift gears a little bit and to talk about this idea of audience labor. And hopefully you'll give me a little bit of leave here. This is a moment in which my stripes as a critical historian of media and technology begin to present themselves. And this will get a little bit stretchy in terms of its politics, so please bear with me. Dallas W. Smythe, who is a kind of, I don't know how to describe him best, an old school sort of political economist of media. He died in the early 1990s. Wrote a path-breaking essay in 1977 called Communications, Blind Spot of Western Marxism. And it's particularly helpful in this regard. Now, there, Smythe set out to answer the seemingly sort of straightforward question, maybe it's not so straightforward. What is the commodity form of mass-produced, advertising-supported communications? Now, the most immediately apparent answer is programming content, of course. And in the specific case of Smythe's essay, writing in 1977, he was talking largely about television. But what's interesting is that Smythe rejected the kind of common sense view in no uncertain terms. And this is where the Marxism comes in. Bear with me. Quote, the bourgeois idealist view of the reality of the communication commodity is messages, information, images, meaning, entertainment, orientation, education, and manipulation. All of these concepts are subjective mental entities and all deal with superficial appearances, end quote. Okay, we're done with the Marxism now. Now, thus, media content was, to use that terminology, merely the form of appearance of something even more fundamental. The labor audiences perhaps unwittingly engaged in each time we turned on our TV sets. Consequently, Smythe referred in his work not to audiences, but instead to the audience product or the audience commodity. He did so in an effort to underscore the ways in which television networks packaged and sold viewers to advertisers with the promise that some, and hopefully many, would go on to consume the products the latter were charged with promoting. So for Smythe then, TV watching was an instrument of commodifying human labor power, albeit one that put a kind of new twist on an old Marxian theme. Rather than selling one's labor power on the open market for oneself and being remunerated accordingly, television executives and producers essentially alienated viewers' labor from them and reaped all of the financial rewards. Now, this is relatively old news where media studies is concerned, but book historians are perhaps maybe not quite as hip to some of these ideas. So in what remains of this paper, then, what I'd like to do is to stage the problem of Kindle by following a blueprint similar to the one drawn up by Smythe. Now, this is called the labor of reading. Onboard mobile phone technology makes Kindle probably the first standalone e-reading device to provide for instantaneous two-way communications between bookseller and consumer. It's little wonder then that Bezos describes Kindle not as a device but as a service and as an extension of the Amazon store. Kindle promises nothing less than to usher in an era of convenient, ubiquitous bookselling. Much has been made about Kindle's downstream capabilities, the fact that you can access the complete contents of any Kindle formatted book in under a minute. In fact, I have Jonathan Zittrain's book on my Kindle as we speak. But what about the data it transmits upstream, back to Amazon.com? The Kindle license agreement in terms of use are instructive in this regard. In the subsection entitled Information Received, the agreement states, quote, the device software will provide Amazon with data about your device and interactions with the service, and information related to the content of your device and your use of it, such as automatic bookmarking of the last page read and content deletions from the device. Here's the especially intriguing part. Annotations, bookmarks, notes, highlights, or similar markings you make on your device are backed up, love those words, through the service and subject to Amazon.com's privacy notice, end quote. Now here it's worth mentioning all of the data you generate while reading your Kindle falls within the purview of the information that Amazon.com collects and analyzes for marketing purposes. I'll return to this point shortly, but let me say a few words first about some recent changes Amazon has made to its corporate identity and core mission. Most people probably consider Amazon.com to be an online retailer. Fair enough. It's only partially accurate, however. Since 2002, the company has actively, and until the last year or two quite quietly, been making it over into the image of a web services provider, or even more ambitiously into a platform upon which to conduct on and offline businesses. Kindle's data collection efforts thus belong to a much broader corporate strategy in which, as Forbes magazine has put it, Amazon's, quote, behind-the-scenes data services are beginning to emerge center stage, end quote. Now, these include Amazon Web Services Elastic Compute Cloud, or EC2, which provides pay-forward, on-demand computing capabilities to third-party businesses, and Amazon Simple Storage Service, or S3, in which businesses pay Amazon for the right to store their data on the company's voluminous servers. So Amazon isn't the retailer that most of us think we know. It is also and significantly becoming what Businessweek has called, quote, a kind of 21st century digital utility, not unlike my friend Siva Vaidyanathan's old nemesis, Google. Now, of course, Amazon has been collecting, analyzing, and exploiting customer information since its inception back in 1994. But in conjunction with its recent emphasis on data services, it seems to me that Kindle promises to intensify this process in at least three ways. First, by broadening the scope of data collection to encompass not only the retail sphere, which has long been mined for what Oscar Gandy calls actionable customer intelligence, but also now the fine grain of everyday life itself. Second, and more specifically, by transforming people's idiosyncratic and heretofore largely private reading itineraries into data-generating activities. And finally, then, by implicating those acts in a larger system of production relations whereby they become a form of instrumental value-producing labor. The result of these processes is a version of Michel de Certeau's readerly world as seen through the looking glass. Readers, according to Certeau, in the practice of everyday life, surreptitiously raid texts as they meander through them, quote, insinuating the ruses of pleasure and appropriation as they render texts temporarily habitable, end quote. In this way, readers play a kind of trick on publishing gatekeepers whose power and authority they challenge, as it were, through their small but significant acts of, in Certeau's words, textual poaching. Amazon, however, would seem to be playing an even bigger trick on Kindle readers. The technology effectively transforms the latter into the terminal nodes of a massively distributed on-the-go focus group. Kindle readers may still insinuate and appropriate, but all the while, Kindle is recording, mining, and exploiting their everyday textual encounters for profit. I'll end there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And can you say, I don't know, penultimate but not least, is Jessamyn West, who is a community librarian technologist, which is a very special and very important category in the way that, for example, your mechanic, I think, is a very important, plays a very important role for the way that the entire United States works. She is a blogger at Jessamyn.com or Jessamyn.com with a Y. And last but certainly not least, also is very heavily involved as a moderator of Metafilter, which itself is a sort of sophisticated aggregation service. If you haven't used it before, I recommend looking at it. So without further ado, again, Jessamyn West, thank you.
Thanks for calling my big community blog sophisticated. I've just got a few slides. And they're in HTML. But while I wait for this to load, those are the things, I don't know if you saw the little alert at the bottom, that would totally like freak people out at my public library and make them leave and not use the computer again for another week or two until they'd gotten to actually talk to me. I don't know, this has nothing to do with me. Okay, this is the public library that I work in. I would just like to tell you that actually in the public library we're not struggling really badly. Actually, where I live up in central Vermont, northern New England. This is Tunbridge Public Library. We serve a population of 900. The only reason I can support myself working in a public library with a population of 900 is because I have one of those internet jobs where I can take anywhere in the world, and I decided to go live up north. I actually live in a slightly bigger town, but this is the sort of bucolic inside of my town, and I'll be showing you a little picture of the bucolic outside of my library. And I'm here to talk about the small-scale individual human issues surrounding Library 2.0, because one of the other things that I do when I'm not working at the public library or moderating my sophisticated website is I wander around. I'm just going to go back and tell them that. I wander around and talk to people in the library world at library conferences all over the world, how to employ Library 2.0, how to use it in their libraries. Something wrong? Okay. How to use it in their libraries, what it means, and et cetera. And one of the big things about the Library 2.0 thing generally, and if you want to look at the 6 slides, you can look at it right there, is, you know how like if you've got a friend that's sort of indicative or representative of some small niche group of people that maybe it's your friend in a wheelchair or your friend with one eye, and they become the person that you ask the questions, every single question you have ever had about, well, what's it like in a wheelchair? What's it like to not have binocular vision? And your poor hapless friend who's like, well, I'd really like to be more than whatever, but I'll just answer your questions over and over and over again. That's me and the little rural public library. Like, what's it like living in the country? I have a hard time getting my head around it. I went to Vermont once, and so I'm just gonna, no, seriously, so I'm gonna talk to you just a little bit about what's it like,
Can
basically.
I break in for a moment to respond to one concern? Apparently, a number of people have asked, why can't we turn down the lights so that you can see the slides more clearly? And unfortunately, the answer is, again, because someone is videotaping up there, and we end up with a sort of paradox of the digital. If we turn down the lights, yeah, you won't be able to see, but you will be able to hear. The slides will be made available and will be, I believe, swapped in for some of the videos as well. So in the later recordings of this, they will be amplified. Now I'll shut up again. I'm sorry. Thank you much for your patience.
And if you happen to have like a computer, my slides are available right now, so you can go follow along right there. And there's 5 of them, so they'll be real short. This is the picture of my public library, and it looks kind of a lot like the other picture of the public library you saw earlier today, except I should note, this picture was taken in 2008. So, no, seriously, this is where I work. It's the public library. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the assumptions that go into my work kind of on the other side of the digital divide. My library has internet. My library has wireless. My library has 4 computers, thanks to the Gates Foundation. Without the Gates Foundation, we would have none. And if you want to talk about a Faustian bargain, let's talk about the Gates Foundation and their computer situation. But seriously, we wouldn't have computers. We really wouldn't. Nobody would have decided that now was really the time to do that yet. So the library is the only place within 10, 15 miles to get access to public internet. And as a result, we are thriving. People use the library like crazy. It's open 20, 22, 24 hours a week, but like everybody in town has a key. I mean, seriously, you know that movie, The Village, where everybody lives in the little, if you haven't seen it, I'm real sorry, but I'm going to spoil the ending for it. They're like living in this kind of old-timey town, and there's monsters at the gates and whatever, but it turns out it's really this theme park, and they want to raise their children in this olden time that I think some of us hold dear to our heart, as if it were a place that actually existed and we weren't all sick with sort of polio and dysentery. So Tunbridge is really trying to be that place, and it's wonderful. I'm the luckiest person alive to get to work at this library and then also get to leave and talk to other people. No, and talk, well, sort of, and talk to other people about what it's like. Because the biggest thing about being a public librarian in a library like this is the chances that you're leaving and talking to other librarians in big places like this or big places like anything is practically zero. Nobody leaves because they love it there. Nobody leaves because they don't get any time off. Nobody leaves because they can't afford it. Seriously. So that kind of divide, that intellectual divide, is a really big deal. So a couple assumptions that I work with, and I'm just going to kind of rattle through these. You know, dealing with that network effect that is like the 2.0 thing. Like, I don't have internet up here on the stage, and it's actually making me a little like nervous. You know, like what's my, you know, my beep sort of whatever. That kind of network effect requires access to network. Dial-up isn't really network. Most of the people in Tunbridge, if they have any internet at home, have dial-up. Most of them bring their laptops, if they have laptops, to the library to do their software updates, because you can't actually do a software update anymore. So you want to talk ethics, let's talk about the fact that nobody with a dial-up connection can safely protect their computer from whatever the big bad internet has, and a lot of people don't even know. There's a knowledge gap there. The Ajaxified web, if I say Ajax, do people kind of know what that is? That kind of responsiveness that new websites have, where like on Google Maps, if you move the map over a little bit and the whole page doesn't have to reload from the top down, that's because Google's loading stuff in the background while you're looking at the page. It's awesome, right? If you're like me and you're kind of in a hurry and you're like, you know, but that requires bandwidth and intensity. It doesn't require it, but you know, 95% of the pages that are designed with that kind of responsiveness need it. You know, my people don't necessarily know this, so it's one more thing on the long list of while you're going to get online, here's some other things I should tell you. E-government, my man Obama really wants people to get online, and that's super, right? Let's do our taxes online. Let's save some money by not mailing people these tax forms. We actually got a letter at the Tunbridge Library from the IRS saying we're not going to mail you tax forms anymore because we're saving the country money, which is terrific, right? Except at the time, all we had was dial-up, and so this irs.gov thing that was supposed to solve our problems and save you money wasn't quite as useful as it could be, right? And overcoming the digital divide requires more than just one more website talking about the digital divide. Seriously, these people are offline. My cell phone does not work at the library. And so economies of scale, like the ones that you would have, break down in these edge cases where I am. Here's a couple charts. Everybody loves charts. I read Pew Internet Reports for fun. So let's talk about who's got broadband. Half of adults in low income, this goes down to 25% at home. Half of the people between 50 and 64 have broadband at home. That drops to 19% when you talk about people over 65, which means they're also less likely to have used the internet at work. They're less likely to have learned it at school. Dial-up actually is getting more expensive and broadband is getting cheaper. I'm in one of those little red line neighborhoods. DSL cost me 17 bucks, and people in my town are paying 20 bucks for dial-up because they don't know there's a difference. They don't know there's something else, and they're not on the internet bargain shopping for bandwidth. And then, you know, let's be serious for a second. 50% of the people on the face of the earth have never made a telephone call. So we're in the rarefied air atmosphere to begin with, but that doesn't mean it's not real. And if you want to click through and read the Pew Internet Report and home broadband, I'd really recommend it. When we talk about diversity, we don't have a lot of cultural diversity in northern New England, and that makes me really sad, but what we do have is some really aggressive class diversity. The funny joke sort of is when you talk to people in Vermont about their stock, they'll tell you that one of them died. It's so easy, right? But like, we're not having an economic crisis because we're always in economic crisis. That's nothing new. We don't have investments. You know, what we want is, you know, internet at home, and we want our families to be sort of safe and happy. So this is who's getting broadband. Rich people aren't getting it because they have it. A lot of the people in the middle incomes get a little bit more flush and they get some internet. And over here, low income people, they're getting less internet. They're saving money by getting offline. And what does that mean for, you know, Obama's do your taxes kind of thing? So a couple questions I think about. These people need e-government the most. They're getting access to it the least, and they're only getting it through the public library. And, you know, federal government's not paying me any money to get everybody on the internet. And they're not paying me any money to teach people how to use the internet. And I'm not complaining. Like, I love my life. But if we really need to talk about who's going to solve the problem, because I'm all about solving problems, right? How do we figure out how to solve that problem for these people? And when we talk about, I was listening to the people earlier talk about local, right? Why aren't we solving these public library problems at a national level? It's crazy. Well, when you think about it, who's our national level leadership? Library leadership. I mean, maybe you know about the American Library Association. They do some nice legislation stuff. There's some big granting organizations that give money, but in the state of Vermont, all of our money comes from the town meeting. All of our money comes from the local people, which means you get up in a room that's about this big with everybody from your town, and they tell you all the things you did last year that kind of annoyed them, and then they say, thank God we're on the internet, we'll continue to fund you. And so 2.0 stuff, to get back to that very briefly, sometimes feels like the anti-local. It feels like it's diluting our sort of charming local brand. Not in a bad way, and I use it more than anybody else, but that's one of the things that we think about. It's one of the things that I think about when people are creating content online. Maybe they're not working with their neighbors, maybe they're not getting outside. That's not a big deal, but we want to make the internet a genuine option for people, which means putting it where they are already with connectivity, but also allowing them to interact with their people they're interacting with already, in addition to everybody else. And somebody's got to be there first, that's like me and some other people where we are, in order to sort of move them out there. The fact that this stuff is free is great, but it doesn't totally solve the problem. What we find is useful, showing people themselves on the internet is the next sort of genuine option. So lastly, you guys know Michael Pollan, right? He talks a lot about, you know, eating food and how to do sort of local stuff, and he's really sort of popular where I am. When we talk about stuff like privacy, one of the things that's happening is somebody like me is explaining to somebody like Farmer Bob at my library what that really, really long contract means that they're clicking OK to, which is one of 100 steps to get them an email account, and being sort of in people's way in order to explain things to them. Figuring out how to set expectations for all these things that people are using, and trying to figure out how to let them know what's on the other side and not freak out when they get sort of JavaScript alerts. Using these tools ourselves, do we make it look sophisticated? Do we make it look fun? Do we make it look hard? Do we make it look like a challenge? And you know, my patrons are reading left to right and top to bottom, and every word you add on an internet page is one more thing that they have to get through. So Michael Pollan talks a lot about food, and he's like, you know, eat food, not so much, mostly plants, is his sort of summary. And my big question for my people, and relating them to your people and our people ultimately, is, you know, use the internet, great, not too much, because, you know, there's other sort of things out there, and mostly what? Basically the internet and the network and all that sort of stuff, it supplants and supports our lives, but it's also really important to explain to people that it's not replacing or overlapping the things that we already have. Thanks.